Hi, welcome to Nova History Remembered. The W&OD started the 1950s with passenger service dwindling as gas was plentiful and people loved their fast new cars. The post-war economy was booming and people could afford to drive themselves to their destination. Passenger service wouldn't last too much longer on the W&OD.
The general manager of the W&OD had never been a big fan of the passenger service. George Baggett had been in the freight department with the Southern Railway before moving to the W&OD and was named general manager there in 1932. He began working towards abandoning the passenger service in the 1930s and was successful in shutting it down for a few years in the early 1940s. The federal government forced the railroad to restart passenger service in 1943 due to gas shortages and the need to get World War II workers to their jobs. Some of the self-propelled passenger cars the company was using had compartments where mail could be sorted after collecting it at train stations. Train workers would sort the mail as they rode to the next station. In 1951, the W&OD lost the mail contract to a trucking company, which hurt as the revenue from the Postal Service was the only thing keeping the passenger service from losing money. George Baggett's efforts in the early 1950s to stop carrying passengers were finally successful as that service stopped for good, despite an impassioned effort by a few riders to keep it running. The last passenger car made its run on May 31, 1951, completely full with train enthusiasts who wanted one last ride. This included some teens skipping school on a Thursday and a resident of Quebec, Canada, William Straight, who'd read about the end of passenger service and rode a train to the Washington, D.C. area for the final day of the W&OD trolleys. In 1954, something happened which might have kept the Washington and Old Dominion Railroad running into the new century. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad purchased the W&OD to supply coal to a power plant the Potomac Electric and Power Company was planning to build in Sterling along the Potomac River. Trains would bring the coal from the Potomac train yards in Alexandria and use a new connecting track through Sterling to the power plant. Pepco instead built their plant in Dickerson, Maryland, after that state made them a more lucrative offer. Had the plant been located on the Virginia side of the river, the W&OD Railroad would probably still be running today. Pepco had already purchased the land for the plant in Sterling, so instead they built a golf course and a recreation area for their employees. In the mid-1970s, that land was sold to Nova Parks and it became Algonquian Regional Park. The railroad had a few good years when Dulles Airport was built starting in 1958. Sand for the concrete runways was brought up from Alexandria by rail and transferred to trucks at this site just west of Route 28, then hauled to the airport. With the building boom in Northern Virginia during the late 1950s and into the 1960s, the Washington Old Dominion Railroad had a lucrative contract from Trap Rock Quarry, which was on the east side of Goose Creek and now called Luckstone Quarry. The contract called for the rail line to haul stone for roads, parking lots, and buildings. Gravel from there was taken east to become the base for the Capital Beltway section in Virginia. There were still a number of other commercial businesses which relied on the railroad to bring products in or out. These included concrete plants, fuel depots, grain mills, and the well-known Bowman Distillery, home of Virginia gentlemen. In the late 1950s, the W&OD locomotives were also pulling boxcars loaded with goods bound for hardware and farm supply stores, or just to drop large mail-order items for local residents. Nichols Hardware of Purcellville had relied on the railroad for deliveries since its founding in 1914. After purchasing it, the C&O Railroad made little investment in the Washington and Old Dominion, which resulted in derailments when old rails became brittle and cracked under the weight of the train cars and locomotives. Deferred maintenance also led to washouts of some of the hundreds of pre-Civil War stone culverts. Increased traffic on the roads made trips on the rail line longer and much more difficult for freight trains. The crossings of many busy suburban roads, such as Maple Avenue in Vienna and Broad Street, Route 7 in Falls Church, were especially difficult, as documented in these photos by T.A. Coons of Falls Church. The train drivers feared crossing some of the intersections, and despite all their care, accidents did occur. Accidents at intersections became more frequent as motorists tried to beat trains across the road, as did this truck driver on Shirley Highway, now I-395. The difficulty of crossing the high-speed four-lane Shirley Highway finally closed down the W&OD Railroad for good. Neither the Highway Department nor the railroad wanted to bear the expense of building a bridge. Before the shutdown, some of the few remaining freight customers of the W&OD banded together in an attempt to gain control of the rail line to keep it running. They made a case before the Interstate Commerce Commission that the service provided by the W&OD couldn't be replaced in other ways, an argument not consistent with what was happening at the time. The ICC judge dismissed their case and granted the abandonment. But in doing so, he said that in 10 years, the people of Northern Virginia would be sorry to lose the railroad. He must have been thinking of the expansion of the suburbs and how congested the roads would become. After the railroad shut down, the connecting line from Roslyn to the Wilson Boulevard area of the W&OD was taken by the Virginia Department of Transportation for I-66. Virginia Electric and Power Company, now Dominion Energy, bought most of the main line from Alexandria to Purcellville to use as a power right-of-way and to add to their existing system of transmission towers. In the mid-1970s, Nova Parks bought most of the railroad property from VEPCO and built a multi-use trail on the W&OD, now one of the most popular parks in Virginia.
I was honored to be the manager of the W&OD Trail for 20 years, and during that time I collected as much of the history of the railroad as I could find. Much of it donated or loaned by local residents who were happy to hear the railroad was going to be remembered. There are over 3,000 photos and documents in a collection maintained by Nova Parks, and they've been used in magazines, books, and documentaries about the railroad and Northern Virginia. Thank you for watching Nova History Remembered, and if you'd like to see more videos about local history, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Be sure to click the bell icon so you'll be notified when new programs are released. Thanks again.